Okay, well, hello everyone. Welcome to this first interactive session we're doing this evening. This is our first Heidelberg Engineering virtual workshop. So the plan with this evening is I'm joined with my colleagues here, and we're going to run through basically how to use a Spectralis focusing for this session on the retina. We're doing 4 of these after this. We're also going to do one focused on glaucoma. We're also doing one focusing on anterior OCT, OCTA, and of course this retina one as well. If you've never seen me before on your screens, my name is Tim Cole. I'm the Clinical Affairs Manager. You'll notice I'm fully PPE'd up here. We've got a breath shield on the Spectralis, so we're all being very safe, because I'm also joined here by Nathan Odell. He's probably on the right-hand side of your screen here. Nathan is the sales area manager for the Midlands and the Southwest. Also in the background is my trusty colleague, Emily. She is producing this program this evening. So Emily's going to be answering your questions and reading them out to me as we go along. And really, this is the goal of this session. This isn't a static one-way thing we're doing here. The hope with this session this evening is that you almost have a window into looking how a Spectralis works, but also an opportunity to ask us any questions you might have that have been in your mind about using these machines. If you've experienced, bear with me. We're going to start with the basics and work our way through to the juicy stuff later on. So yeah, keep those questions coming in. If you're new to the GoToWebinar platform, you can ask us those questions by typing in those questions on the menu bar you have on your screen on whatever you're using. So what's going to happen shortly is I'm going to vanish, because we're going to leave the main part of the screen to what you came here to see, which is actually the acquisition screen of the Spectralis itself. But before we do that, I'm just going to run through with you some of the kit I'm working with this evening, for those of you that maybe are used to a different system or you've seen one of these before. So what we have in front of me here on my side, on my left-hand side, is the Spectralis itself. Now, this is actually a plus system, and what that means is it's able to pan and tilt the head. We can move it up and down, left and right, and the actual base of this system is actually just a joystick only. Now, some of you may be using systems which actually have the capture button on the joystick itself. That's the slightly different unit. This one is the one that actually comes with a touch panel, so you probably can't see that on your screen, but on the right-hand side of me is a touch panel here, and that's because this is a full HRA Spectralis that photographers use for doing fluorescein angiography, all the different modalities, but crucially, you need a touchscreen panel to be able to control the brightness, and that's what's very different about this device from other machines. If you have heard of our machines before, just to let you know, this is an OCT2 system, so that means it's a very fast Spectralis engine in the background there, working at 85 kilohertz, so it's a very fast OCT, and hopefully you're going to get a glimpse of that this evening as we walk through the different scan patterns available in the retina mode. So we've got those 2 things. That's the system. The only thing that's outstanding is we do have a wide field lens here with us as well. This is called the WFO2 lens, but let's see how we go with time for the actual retina scans I'm going to go through. We'll see what's happening at the end and how many questions, if any, come through about that. But the plan really is to just primarily get you up to speed so you understand confocal infrared imaging and how it works with OCT in retina mode. So I'm going to vanish now, and hopefully you can all see the screen in front of you. And on this screen, you should be able to see a large black box with the Heidelberg logo in the bottom corner. Now, this really is our acquisition window, and this is what happens when you go into our software and open up a new acquisition session. And there's really 2 ways of turning on the camera at this point. You can use your mouse, like I'm doing here, and click on this universal power button. Or in the system I've got, we can actually use the touchscreen panel to press the power button on there. But before we go anywhere, I just want to emphasize something that's a lot of sometimes experienced users don't realize. This is quite an essential screen to tell you how happy the Spectralis is, because this information bar at the bottom tells you if there's ever a problem or anything like that, it will give you that information down at the bottom. But if it's happy, it will say in green there, press button on touch panel to start the live image. So as I said, it knows there's a touch panel attached to this system. Okay, so let's go into acquisition. So the first thing I'm going to do, before we even line Nathan up, first and foremost, you always make sure your patient's comfortable. So what I'm doing right now is I'm moving the table down a little bit. I'm adjusting the chin rest so that Nathan's head lines up with the medial canthus markers. And hopefully on the screen, you should be able to see a white spot. Now that is actually the reflection bouncing back in infrared off Nathan's retina. Now, when we're doing our training, one of the really important things I always try and encourage is how to focus with this device. The Spectralis is a manual OCT, and the benefit of having a manual system is you can adapt very quickly yourself to a changing situation. So if you do have a challenging patient, rather than what may happen with an automated OCT, you need that freedom to be able to dive in and change any of those settings. And really, one of the biggest skill sets to using this system is in the focus wheel itself. So what I'm doing right now is I'm moving that focus wheel, and hopefully you can see on the bottom left of the screen, the focusing diopters there. Let's come all the way to a plus diopter. And what you'll actually notice now is the infrared is actually focused on the front of Nathan's eyes. We've not got to the retina yet, of course. I just want to give you a good idea of where we are. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm simulating this sweeping motion that you should really get used to when you're lining this camera up. I see a lot of people when they're new to using the Spectralis doing small, little, tiny movements like this. Really, to get in focus, it's a big sweeping motion until you see it sharp, and then you can fine tune it a little bit. We'll do that a bit more when we get on the retina. But first and foremost, let's put ourselves into a 0 diopter before we get onto Nathan's retina. So we're at 0 now, and what I'm going to do is just push forward with the base. Now, at the moment, of course, we don't have OCT enabled. This is just the infrared, and you can see in the box here, it tells you exactly what mode we're in. We're in infrared reflectance image mode. So I'm just going to push forward with the base. Now, the key with doing this is you always want to try and keep that circle in the middle. Now, what I'm doing here, I'm just waving the joystick around to simulate a real life situation with a badly behaved patient. You've got to kind of grab hold and just keep that hot spot right in the middle and push right into the sun there. So as we push in, we fill the screen with the brightness. Now, because I'm using a touch panel system and it's not got auto brightness enabled, I'm using the little roller wheel to bring down that oversaturation of the image. And this is the key really, is to get this consistent brightness edge to edge, right the way across that infrared square, okay? Now you may be able to see, depending on the resolution of what you're using to look at the image there, when we've got overexposing of the infrared image, you get these small kind of blue and red pixels. What we could do is, again, just adjust the brightness to get rid of those hot spots. That's what we want to do. So before we do anything else, what I'm going to do to begin with is just capture an infrared high resolution image. Before I do though, I just want to make sure we're nice and sharp on Nathan's retina, because Nathan's prescription might not be perfect plano. So again, I'm moving brave movements there with the focus. And when I find I'm in the right spot, what should happen is the screen will go very bright, because it can actually sense when you're nice and focused. You get this brightness when you're in the right place. And crucially, what we're looking for when we're focusing in with the infrared is we're looking for these perifoveal vessels. Can we see those nice and sharp around the fovea there? And if you look closely, what's actually amazing about this system is you can actually see the blood flow going through these vessels. They're moving and wiggling. We've even got a little bit of venous pulsation there around the optic nerve. Because of course, with the touchscreen panel, we can also take a movie of this, but let's just stick to taking a still image for now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something very important now. It's really a crucial part of this system, and I'm going to engage the tracking, okay? Now what that means is when I engage the tracking, we actually freeze a final image, okay? Now you can either do this with the joystick with a long press, or with the touchscreen as a longer press on the black brightness button. What that actually did is it locked onto Nathan's retina and built up this infrared image using the automatic real-time tracking system, and it combined together 100 frames. That's what it did. So as that final painting was put together, Nathan could have blinked, moved, it wouldn't have mattered, because nothing really affects that final image. All it's doing is it's picking out the best parts of the image to build up our final image. So once I'm happy with that, I'm going to press acquire. You may have heard a click there. So that's actually saved this final image here. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to disable the tracking. So I'm going to hold down the button again, and we're going to disable it. Now you can see we're back to real time. I've not locked into Nathan's eye. I've already got one picture in the bank, and I can see that from this memory box down there. It says images 1. And that 100% bar there, that's just the local memory on the system. So we could take tons of images like this if we wanted to. But now what we're going to do is I'm going to move Nathan's fixation. So down in this bottom menu here, I'm going to click on this button. And you can actually do this also from the touchscreen panel, but I think for demonstration purposes and where you're looking now, it's easier to just show you on this screen. So what we're going to do now is we're going to click to a nasal fixation. Now what's happened is the blue flashing target inside the Spectralis has moved off to the side now, and Nathan's correctly looking at that right in the middle. Now that's bringing his optic nerve into the center of the image now. So what we could do is again get ourselves nice and focused on that optic nerve. So again, brave sweeping motions until we see that nice and sharp. Again, those little white, blue and red pixels. Let's dial it down a little bit with the brightness, and we're going to lock in the tracking again. And once again, I'm doing the same thing. I'm letting this build up, and we don't have to go all the way to 100. As long as we're happy with this final painted masterpiece, I could just acquire that at any point. Okay, so let's disable the tracking again. Hold down the button, back to tracking. Let's flick over now to a temporal fixation. Okay, now because I've done that, I'm going to have to reposition myself very slightly. But again, importantly, I need to just make sure I've got the right focus on this temporal region. So again, I'm just going to have a little play with the focus there until I'm happy with the sharpness of all these vessels. And once again, dial it down a tiny bit, lock it in for the tracking. And once again, I'm doing the exact same thing. And here what's amazing in infrared, we can actually see as the pigment layer of the retina thins in the periphery towards the temporal side, we can actually see Nathan's choroidal vessels showing through there in infrared. I'm going to acquire that one too. Now, the very important thing to remember, Nathan just sits back for me now, is that all these images were taken without any dilation at all. We're in a very bright room here, and the great thing about confocal infrared imaging is it can also get through cataracts, and also with difficult patients as well. Say Nathan had a nystagmus or he's moving around a lot, you could actually combat that by locking in with the tracking system. That's really one of the golden things about our system. So what we're doing is we're just going back into the software. Before we go into OCT, I just want to show you what we can actually do with these infrared images. Now, some of you might not recognize this software I'm using. This is actually HEYEX 2. This is our most modern version of HEYEX. But the good thing about HEYEX 2 is it still has components of HEYEX 1. So even if you aren't familiar with this database platform, when I open a thumbnail here, you can see that the actual image looks the same as a HEYEX 1 window. And for those of you that have used HEYEX 1 before, what's great is all the tools are still the same. To any of those of you that are new though, these are some tools that we could use with retinal infrared imaging here that really help out. So I'm going to click now on this button in the top left corner. So this is the brightness and contrast button. And what I want you to do is pay attention to this infrared image, because what we could do is, using the slider tools, we could change the brightness of it, the contrast. You could even grab that little spot and do things simultaneously if you wanted to do that. Below that, we have the color table. Some people like to do this, depending on the pathology you're looking at. You could switch it around to black on white with the infrared, or even use pseudo color. Again, some people like to do this if they're perhaps showing it to a patient to simulate a color photograph. But crucially, when it comes to these infrared images, one of the most useful little boxes on this brightness and contrast button is the sharpen tab. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to pop in a bit more sharpening on this image. And what you'll notice, if I zoom in on the image, is the blood vessels become very, very sharp. And it really shows you how amazing it is to have confocal infrared images. You can get this texture of the retina that you really can't get with traditional photography. So if you do add anything to the image, you can just press OK, and it will save that within the window. But there's a reason why I took 2 extra infrared images here, because I want to stitch these together. Now, again, this is something you could do. At the moment, we're just using a 30-degree lens to capture these images, so I can actually stitch together all 3 by highlighting them. What I've done here is I just held down Control to do that. That's the same in HEYEX 1, or you can drag a box over all 3. And once they're all illuminated, we can right-click and go to Compute Composite. And what that will actually do is stitch all those images together. And straight away, look at that. Because we've taken our time, we've focused each image, and we've moved the fixation target to those 3 different places, we've now got a wonderful wide field infrared image that really you could say is 90 degrees across the retina there. And again, I could still add some more effects to this. Like, for example, I could put in a bit more sharpening again, and there you can see the wonderful detail and texture we've got of Nathan's retinal nerve fiber layer in this left eye of his, the structure of the arteries and vessels there, and as I say, where the pigment layer starts to thin out and we see the choroidal vessels shining through. So again, all that is simply saved on the database there. So step 2 really is now going to involve the OCT. So let's go back into acquisition, and we'll go back to that screen I mentioned before, and we'll just wait for the Spectralis to connect and the information bar to tell me that it's happy with the machine, and it is. We're all happy, we're all good to go. So let's click the yellow acquisition button again. Now this time I'm going to click on OCT, where it says OCT off. I'm going to click on there, and for this session we're just going to focus on OCT. As I mentioned right at the beginning, we're doing a separate one for OCTA in the coming months, but we're just going to choose OCT for now, because I want to run through all these buttons using OCT. Now what will happen when you go into OCT is it will actually default to this 30-degree single line scan. So let's try and understand what exactly the OCT scan pattern is going to be. Well, whatever scan pattern you're going to take is actually in this scan window here. Here you can see we're on a single line there. We can see that the angle of this is a horizontal scan. If I wanted to flick it to vertical, I could just alternate with those 2 arrows there. And at the moment, the art frame is set to 100. So this is going to take the highest quality OCT we can, just like we did with the infrared image, except this time the art will be working with the OCT. So we're going to build up an OCT image this time to 100 frames. So let's once again line up Nathan. We can see where the reflection of his retina is coming from. We're going to move in. And again, once we're on his retina, we're going to dial down the brightness. So we've got a nice focus there. Now, I may have gone a little bit quick there. Some people do this when they're new to this OCT. They go too close to the patient. And when you do, you get a red bar there. You do get a little bit closer to Nathan's eye. Don't worry, I'm not poking him in the eye, but you know, because your OCT flips upside down. So really, this is about where you want to keep your OCT. You might not be able to see on your camera, but what we actually have in the OCT window here is this sweet spot, these blue brackets in the top half of the screen. And what I always try and advise is you kind of want the the OCT image almost like 2/3 up within that sweet spot window, okay? Now, the great thing is, again, is once we lock in and engage that art tracking, Nathan can then blink, cough, sneeze, do whatever he likes. It doesn't matter. It's not going to impact that final image. So I'm happy with the focus on the infrared. I'm happy with the OCT. Let's lock it in. So once again, oh, actually, I'm just going to undo that a second because you see it went really bright there. I'm just going to dial it down a little bit. There we go. Lock it in again. And straight away, see how quickly that built up to 100 frames. So that's the OCT now, and I'm going to save that. So now we've got a fantastic high-res OCT saved in the bank, one image there. Now, one of the common things we always get at Heidelberg is people say, oh, your system's slow as well as complicated. So I'm going to address that as well now, because first scan along our presets here, it's actually called the Art1 scan. Now, what Art1 is, it's a scan pattern. You can always see again what the scan pattern is from this window here. It's comprised of 97 sections by default, but crucially, look at what it says about the art. It's on one frame. So technically, this resolution of OCT without any averaging or real-time tracking adding on top of it is actually the same res as most other OCT machines out there, except because we're just using Art1, I'm going to show you now how fast that moves across the eye. So this is actually with a fairly dense 97 section image, but we'll do the same process. Lock in and then press acquire. Now look at that, 97 OCTs taken very quickly. Let's move that actually down to the standard 25 sections that you get with the fast macular pattern, but we'll leave it on art, okay? I want you to try and see how quickly this happens, okay? So we'll lock in. Now from here, I'll press acquire. So I'm going to press acquire now. That's it, just did 25 OCT sections in less than half a second. Now, the reason why I think that's really important for everyone to understand about this system is that if you have an extremely difficult patient or a tricky patient, you can fire off that fast OCT, and then that can always be your reference for follow-up more detailed scans. But crucially, if you're ever struggling to catch an OCT, it's just shows you how fast we can really go with this system. So let's go along now to the next button. As I mentioned, this is the fast pattern. Most macular medical retina units we go and see generally use this pattern most of the time, and it's a good overview of the retina in 25 sections, and actually you can actually see on the scan window there how far apart they're spaced. So what that means is that each one of these blue lines is split apart by 240 microns. Now again, for most pathologies that's fine, but if you do want anything more detailed, you can of course do that with other patterns, and I'll come to those in a moment. But just to give you an idea, this is the general speed of the fast macular pattern, this time with an Art9 frame. So we'll lock in again, press acquire. So again, still very quick, but the crucial thing there is each one of those sections had Art9, so it was a nice in-between of high resolution and that single Art1 frame. Are you okay there, Nathan? Have a good blink for me, mate. So now we'll move on and we'll go to the next pattern along. So again, if you notice, when I hover my mouse around, it actually tells you exactly what pattern is, what comprises each pattern there as well. So click on the dense one. And when I click on the dense one, we're jumping up now. So we're going up to 16 frames, 49 sections, closer together now at 120. So let's just do that again. And I'm going to lock in and press acquire. Now again, this would be for more fine pathology. You're trying to see something in a bit more detail. Again, it's still very quick with this OCT2 engine, but that's a nice detailed, well, a dense scan. The next one along is of course the detailed one, but what's changed here is we've now shrank down the size. Can you see on this scan window here, we're at a 15 degree by 5 degree window now for our sections. But again, we're still on 16 frames with 49 sections spaced 30 microns apart. So once again, just going to bring the brightness up just a little bit there on the infrared image, and we'll lock in, press acquire. So again, you could do this if you were looking in very high detail at some very tiny pathology right on the fovea. But the thing to also remember is you're not locked to the fovea with these scans. With my mouse, I can drag and drop that scan anywhere I like. So let's whack it over here where Nathan's got some arteries and veins crossing over each other. Again, as soon as I engage that tracking, that area is locked in and I can start capturing away. Now, again, when you're doing live capture for anything that's challenging, this is where all my focus is. I'm making sure I've got good reflectivity on the infrared, and crucially, I'm making sure my OCT stays in that second, third up of our sweet spot of the OCT window. So that's really the trick to using this system, is once you engage the tracking, all your focus is down here. So we're also going to do a peephole scan. So this is like an anatomically orientated OCT pattern that's 61 sections with an ART9, 120 microns apart. So again, just lock in there and we'll go to acquire. So again, can you see where it was red? And I just pulled back a little bit, dialed down the brightness a little bit, just while we were going through the capture there. This is the crucial part of using the Spectralis, is this focus on this window and minutely changing things if you need to. And then just for standard sort of OCT patterns across the scale, we have a 7-line raster at the end, except these ones are an ART frame of 25. So again, I'm just going to lock in and we'll take those there. Okay, I'll let Nathan have a little break now. You just sit back for a second there, mate. That's great. So they're all the preset buttons. Now, anything you maybe want to change, you can actually do with the custom buttons here. So say, for example, I don't know, I wanted to extend the range of those slices right the way across the 30 degrees. If I wanted to put lots and lots of sections in, can you see how far you can go? You can actually go right up there to 651 sections. Now, in reality, you'd never really do anything like that. And actually, when you do go that far, we actually don't have enough local memory to do an image that size. So really, these really dense patterns are for anything odd or specific to a study. But that's how far we could go. And if you did want to, I don't know, go all the way up to like 100 frames on all those sections, you never really would, but that's how detailed really could go. You could save that as a custom image, and can you see it says hold on 2 seconds to save that, and we'll just call that the crazy scan. Okay, and as you can see, that now forevermore lives as a custom button. Now, an important thing to remember about these custom buttons, if you are working on a Spectralis that's part of a network, those custom buttons will actually replicate on all the other systems throughout the hospital or practice that you might be working in. So bear that in mind. If you do have, I've been to places where certain consultants have added their own custom buttons, and it's re-imaged on every single machine and not left any spaces. So just bear that in mind, that you have 4 there if you are doing a particular drug protocol or anything like that. So have you got a question there for me, Anne?
Yeah, going back to the HRA images, stitching them together.
Yeah.
We have a question. How many can you stitch together?
Up to 9, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, keep moving the fixation.
Yeah, just move the fixation around. That's right.
And back on the art one, I think this relates to. Someone did ask, how can you capture images of patients with nystagmus?
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, I'll come back to that in a moment. Actually, let's do that now. Come and take a seat for me again, Nathan. Good. Okay, so we'll go back to the art one, and this time I'm going to try and make things as easy as possible. We'll knock it down to 25 sections, so it's like a fast macular pattern. Now, one of the benefits of having a plus system where you can pan and tilt is you can actually spin the camera round to the side, because one of the biggest tricks for taking images on nystagmus patients is trying to get that eye to stay as still as possible. And it's very difficult, but one of the nice ways to do it is, I'm just going to get Nathan to turn his head off to the right for me. And what I want him to do now is look out of the corner of his eye, okay? Now, you can't actually see it on the camera, but what Nathan's doing there is he's looking right out to the corner of his eye. And if he had a nystagmus, what it's actually doing is it's constricting one of his muscles in his eye and keeping his eye flat against the side of his eyeball socket. So this is a good trick with nystagmus patients, because you could dive in there, lock in, and take those 25 sections. Okay, sit back and relax for me, Nathan. So brilliant. So that's really the secret trick to doing nystagmus patients. Using the ART1 scan, maybe reducing the sections to 25, but that side fixation, which you could actually do by panning the camera. And if you don't have a panning camera, it's still possible. You can just move the patient's head to the side and tell them to look out the corner of their eye. And again, it will just stabilize the eye. Right, so let's have a look around the different control panels here, because one of the things that a lot of people, even experienced users, forget to use or notice is that you actually have a button here to deal with difficult eyes. So say you have a very long eye, this button here actually helps you change the length of the eye setting. And what that actually does is actually changes the reference arm within the Spectralis head to really give you a greater range of the OCT to pick out longer eyes. And as you can see, we have an option for a hyperopic eye with the short there. Medium is what it defaults to, and then the long or extra long there. So if you do have a very high myope, or even someone with deep set eyes in their head, you can actually use this button to get those very challenging OCTs. The thing to remember, if you do have a very high myopic eye, what can happen is the OCT can actually curve in the window. So there's a couple of things we could do to combat that. One is set it to a long eye setting. It doesn't actually change anything on the screen, it just changes that little icon there. But you can also change the size of the scan itself. And by doing that, you won't get any reflections bouncing back of the OCT signal. So that's the eye length, but because Nathan's got a normal eye, we'll leave that on medium. But I'm going to come to this next. This is EDI, okay? So the button next to it stands for Enhanced Depth Imaging. Now, what we'll do is we'll go back to a single line. We'll line up Nathan again. I think maybe we'll give his left eye a bit of a break now, and we'll move to his right eye. So where's his right eye? Let's have a look. So hopefully you can all see that, okay? Just bring the brightness a little bit up there. So let's dial in. I mean, most retinal clinics, you're leaving these things around 0 anyway. So when you dive on them, I'm purely showing you the plus there so you can understand where Nathan's eyeball actually is. So let's move in to Nathan's eye with the OCT now. So as we push in, again, there's Nathan's retina. That's at the correct depth. Let's lower down the brightness a little bit until we've got a nice evenly illuminated infrared image. Now, with OCT2, hopefully you can make it out from the screen there, you actually already see a fairly decent signal all the way through the choroid. And the crucial thing about EDI is that is the structure we're interested in, okay? Now, without EDI enabled, where the higher signal to noise ratio is really in this top box here. And that's why we keep it for looking at intraretinal layers, the RPE itself, and really the top parts, the choriocapillaris and the choroid. But if the focus is down here in the choroid, what the system needs to do is flip that around. And that's exactly what EDI does. So if you can't see it, there's blue brackets in the top part of the window. When I enable EDI, that now drops down. And what that's actually done is that's improved the signal to noise down here in the choroidal area, okay? Now, you can't tell immediately because, of course, this is effectively just an ART1 image. So we're going to build up this EDI image now. Now, the crucial thing here is, again, we can have a little bit of a play with the focus, again, just to see if we could get a bit more brightness on that choroid. So again, can you see, if you wanted to sacrifice your infrared image here, you can actually push the focus. Can you see I've gone to a minus 1.25 there, but it's actually lit up our choroidal structure here, albeit we've lost a bit of sharpness on the confocal image. But if it was something in the choroid, say, for example, something like a nevus or a melanoma, we could just slightly defocus it to gain that. So once again, I'm going to enable the tracking, get up to 100 and acquire that image there, okay? So that was an EDI enabled image, and look how clear we can see all of the different blood vessel layers of the choroid and the choroidal scleral interface and the sclera itself just by enabling EDI. And what I did there is I just pushed the focus just a little bit there. Okay, so that's EDI imaging. That's this button here. Got a couple of questions from Emily. Sit back for a second, Emily.
So should we use HR or HS, so high resolution or high speed in a hospital clinic?
It all depends on how you're reviewing the data, and if you're doing any sort of a drug trial or anything like that. That might be a specified thing in the drug trial. To be honest, most people use high speed simply because when you open these up at high speed, you actually see the layers really well. When you do a high resolution scan, the retina looks a bit more stretched. So it's a good question, Em, and I'll demonstrate that now. What we'll do is we'll flick to high resolution mode. Thanks, Nate. Now in high res, you'll also notice, you probably can't tell from where you are, but the sound of the OCT changed a little bit. So let's just bring our focus back again to 0. Okay. There we go. And we'll turn off EDI because we're just going to replicate the same scan I did just before. Actually, I'll tell you what, let's go back to your left eye, Nathan. And we'll do the same eye with high res so you can see what the difference is in the software. So let's push in. And now, really, what high resolution is doing, it's actually changing the amount of A scans. So, again, if you're ever unsure what's going on, just look in the scan window. When I flick between high speed and high res, can you see it actually changes the A scan value? And basically, what the A scans are these perpendicular light measurements that are giving us our OCT image. So at high resolution, there's actually 1,536 separate A scans across that blue section line. That's why it is high res. There's simply more points being captured as opposed to high speed. So high res is actually very good if you're trying to measure something in detail on the surface of the retina. But like I say, most people tend to stick to high speed for most clinic things. It's just really for drug studies and things like that. Some people use high res. Depends on the ophthalmologist. As we always say, if an ophthalmologist wants to see high res, give them what they're asking for. So, right, we're on high res now. I'm going to do exactly the same. Just lock in and build it. It takes a tiny bit longer at high res, but we'll save that image there. Okay, Nathan, sit back for me now. So just to give you an idea of what that looks like, we'll just escape out now. And when we're doing that, I've just pressed escape on the keyboard. What it's actually doing, it's actually saving all the images you can see in that bottom left-hand side there. And now it's going to translate those into the software. So again, one of the questions we had before this virtual workshop was some people wanted us to show them some autofluorescence and multicolor. So after I've just shown you this high resolution image, we'll see if there's any more questions on the question board, and if we've got time we'll go into Blue Peak and have a look. So to answer that recent question, let's just look at high resolution scan here. Now what you can see is it will actually tell you in the bottom corner there where it says high res. Now remember, the only difference here is you simply have a lot more A scans across that B scan line. But a lot of ophthalmologists, medical retina specialists I speak to, this isn't always their preferred view because you can see the retina looks fairly stretched when you compare it to how a normal high speed scan looks. Can you see the difference? The high speed really looks more of a viewing aspect to what most people are used to looking at when they review OCTs. And again, the good thing about high speed compared to high res, it just gives you that little more view on the different layers rather than the OCT being a little bit stretched out. For the sake of losing some of those A scans, you've still got ART 100 that we're doing here, this wonderful contrast between all those different retinal layers. So again, there's kind of two things balancing here. One is the high resolution. The other one is, of course, the A scan, which is giving us this exceptional quality on the OCT itself. So let's just zoom back a little bit because I want to now just emphasized what we could see in Nathan's choroid down here. So you can still see, this is without EDI, using OCT2. It's very clear view of Nathan's whole choroid there. But again, if I flick on the EDI scan I did, it should actually say that on the image itself. Could you see the thumbnail there? We'll just click on that one. And now you can see, if again, just zoom in a little bit on the OCT, the brighter signal, again, because I defocus a little bit, we've just got a lot more detail of Nathan's choroid down there with EDI. So let's pretend for a second that Nathan has had this image taken and he wants to come back again in the future. So what you would do is, once you've captured your image, and this is something that so many people get wrong, and we have to remind them, so really I hope it's one of the main things you take away from this session, is setting a reference is absolutely vital with our software, especially in medical retina. So let's say, for example, Nathan's been before, we did a fast macular pattern, and we want to repeat the same thing. And it's the same for any of the patterns. What we do is we right click on the thumbnail of the image, and this is exactly the same in the HEYEX software. Go to progression and we set reference. Let's do that for a few scans now. Okay, set reference, set reference. Now, those 3 scans are programmed into the software to repeat the next time. So let's pretend Mr. Odell has come back 3 months later. We've given him an injection of anti-VEGF. We're hoping things have improved, but we crucially need a scan in the exact same place. This is the same with all the scan patterns we could do, is you've got to set that reference first. Now, when we dive straight in there, you actually can't see the follow-up button. It's only on the OCT window. So if I click on the OCT window, now, some of you who are perhaps new to Spectralis, you wouldn't have noticed that before I did this, the OCT, the follow-up button on the OCT window wasn't actually shadowed. It wasn't clickable because I didn't have a follow-up set in place. And that's something to bear in mind. If you're ever in a busy clinic and you're thinking, oh, did this patient have a reference before? Did someone set a reference the first time around? Without going back to the database, you can just actually see if the follow-up buttons, the cartoon of it has actually got a shadow. If you click on that, you can actually now see the reference images that were set the last time Nathan was here, if you can imagine that. Now, the important thing is it will actually default to whichever eye you're on with the Spectralis. If I sweep over to the right-hand side, can you see the right-hand side lights up for doing follow-ups on the right eye? But let's just come back to the left. Turns on for the left. Okay, that's the little switch in the Spectralis itself that's telling us where we are. So I'm going to choose one of these patterns to do a follow-up. We'll just keep it simple. We'll just do a single line and press OK. Now what happens, really importantly, is I get this reference image in the bottom of my screen, and crucially that actually tells me the focus the Spectralis was set to last time, and you can see where the B scan was in the window. So let's try and copy the focus that's on that window. So we were at a +7.5 when I took that last image. Now, if you go too far, remember this information bar at the bottom telling us everything we need to know. If I go too far out of that, it's actually very clever, the system. It will say, whoa, wait a minute, the focus isn't the same as last time. So this is always something to watch out in a clinic. If you're using the system with other users who aren't used to using the follow-up, if you see someone doing that, tell them to just watch out and make sure they try and keep the focus the same. Now, again, patients aren't always the same. We understand things change. They could have an IOL implanted. They could have some sort of corneal problems between the visit on top of their retinal problems. So that might not always be set in stone. That's why you can still capture them if you change the focus. But it is good practice to use that as a reference when you're doing these images. So I've got the OCT about where I want it, fairly good illumination. I'm going to lock in, build up those 100 frames, and now I've done a follow-up image. And because I've done a follow-up image, when I click on that button, it now has a green tick on it. So let's do the section now as well. So I'll click on that one. Again, this time, same focus. We'll leave it there on 0.75. I'll just get the OCT about right. Once again, lock on in case Nathan blinks and press acquire through those Art 1 sections. Now, what's interesting about this scan is I've done the follow-up at Art 1, but let's say, for example, that was a tricky patient, except this time around, this maybe a young child is behaving better this time. What you can actually do is push up the art this time. Let's take it up to 25, and using the follow-up image, I can actually lock onto the retina and take a more detailed OCT. So that's a good little trick. If you've ever, actually with your nystagmus patients, if you've imaged those before and you want to next time around, maybe get a slightly better image if you struggled the first time, you could use that follow-up in that way. But as I say, once you've captured them, we get a small tick on the window there. So let's just press OK on those images. Sorry, I'll just come out of there now. Okay, Nathan, sit back for me for a sec. So once we've done a follow-up, this is really the only way to get the full use out of the Spectralis. It's by using follow-up properly, because one of the common things we say about this system, and we'll talk about this more with the glaucoma session, is with using this technique of follow-up, with setting a reference and follow-up, we can have this 1 to 2 micron repeatability, and it's because of the way the technology works. With a reference image and as a referenced follow-up, we are scanning in the exact same place. Now, when I flick between these two icons, you can actually see what changes on the thumbnail. And on a follow-up image, we get this, instead of a stack of paper with a red reference one at the top, it's a stack with a yellow one in the middle. And that tells you that that's a followed up scan. So when we review these scans, what we can't do without this procedure done, if you've not set reference and done a follow-up, you can't do this, which is compare two images. And really, from a medical retina point of view, this is what every medical retina consultant wants to do. They simply want to look at the last visit and look at your most up-to-date one and see what's changed over time, okay? Now, when we review these two images, we could zoom in this bar, we could see exactly how lined up these OCT images are. Now, you can see some of these hyperreflective spots in Nathan's retina have moved a tiny bit, but that's because his heart's beating. What's crucial is, as I line up my reference to the most recent one, those blood vessels are exactly to the pinpoint in the exact same place. So this is the benefit of having this system in place where we do a reference and a follow-up. Now, to prove that even more, and again, this is one of those little tricks that a lot of medical retina consultants forget or didn't even know was there in the first place, you can actually animate the two images. So what I'm going to do now is click this button down at the bottom called the flicker tool. If I click on that, look what's happening. Now we're actually seeing the animation of the baseline scan to the most recent scan we've done on Nathan's retina. Now, what's amazing, what we're seeing there is actually the change in Nathan's retina from a very slight point of view with the thickness there, just because all these blood vessels pitted throughout his inner retinal layers there. The choroid itself, the really busy choroid, it's got blood pumping through it. So you've got a change in the vessel width, you can see down here, and also the blood vessels within as well. We can also see a slight change in the reflectivity on the surface of the inner limiting membrane there as well. And again, that's just the OCT glancing in a slightly different angle of the surface of Nathan's retina, probably because his heart was beating, or maybe even perhaps my joystick was just by a few fractions to the left or right compared to the previous visit. But what's really important, and the proof of how well the tracking is doing, if I just make the display a large image, is that infrared image is absolutely in the exact same place. As you can see, the only thing that's changing there is maybe the reflection of the infrared is changing a little bit. That's probably giving us the explanation why the OCT is also changing a little bit. So that could also be a tear film. But look at that tiny blood vessel there on Nathan's optic nerve. You can see that animating as his heart beats, that tiny little vessel there. Amazing, just on the cup of his disc there. So again, that just highlights the benefits of this tracking system that we have. Now, I'm just going to quickly also look at a section scan. You can still pick out the contrast between all the different layers, but crucially with a section imaging, we can actually engage the thickness map change. And here you can see the actual EDTRS grid with Nathan's retinal thickness values and the difference between the reference and the up-to-date one. So again, this is a very popular thing with medical retina, where you can actually see the change in the thickness of the retina. Now at this moment, all I've done with these images is I'm just reviewing them at the segmentation of the inner limiting membrane down to Bruch's membrane. One of the ways we can improve on this is we can actually segment all layers. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go to segmentation all layers. So at the moment, what's going to happen is going to be able to show you all the different layers we can segment. So let's just go back to the thickness profile. For your bog standard scan, it's just measuring the retinal thickness from the ILM down to Bruch's there. You can see those two red lines that are giving us that information. Now watch what happens and the difference when I go to segmentation all layers. What it will actually do now is it will actually show all the different 10 layers we can segment through the retina. So again, this is why SPECTRALIS is really a gold standard for research, because we could specify any of these single layers in a thickness map or with any sort of studies or research and actually see the change in individual layers rather than just the overall retinal layer itself. And you can see each of these different colored lines all have the explanation and the abbreviations at the edge of the image there. So if you did want to do that on a volume, you could do the segment all layers as well. It's just a right click, segment all layers like this. Now we're just coming up to the last 7 minutes or so. I've got a few questions here. Someone has asked, how do I change the art frames from 9 to 3 on a fast scan? So let's go back into acquisition. I don't need you back now, Nathan. I think we'll be okay. I can probably just simulate this with the screen. Now, I presume that means the 9 to 3 in the actual, just dragging the slide, isn't it? Yeah, okay. So let's just go back into acquisition.
And then try and save that custom.
Yeah, okay. So Emily's just said to me there, if we wanted to change it from 9 to 3, so I presume someone's talking about the art there, but drag that down to 3. And if you wanted to make that, I don't know, fast 2, you could hold down on the custom button, fast 2, and there you go. Forevermore, you've got a fast edited scan pattern. Okay. Can you recap tricks for imaging myopic eyes and astigmatic eyes? Yeah, I could probably do that where I am right now, to be honest. So the thing to remember again is for astigmatic or very long eyes, you could use this button here really to change how the OCT can view a longer eye. And it's very simple. You could just click on that button and highlight whether it's a long or a very long eye. Now, off the top of my head, I don't actually know the diopters for those, but to be honest anyway, you'd kind of use that and experiment with that yourself live when you're actually on a patient. In terms of astigmatisms, that's a little bit different because we're not necessarily dealing with the length of the eye. It's actually the way the light is bending into the eyeball. So what we could do with astigmatisms is actually experiment with bending the actual pattern around, and with a very stigmatic eye you'll actually often find that a vertical scan pattern can correct and flatten out that OCT image when you're using that. So I hope that answers that question. Can you recap on saving a custom button, how to save your own scan patterns as a preset? I think I answered that with the first one, didn't I, when we just went over the custom one. And if someone did a scan using high resolution, can you do a follow-up in high speed? If it's a high resolution, yeah, you can change whatever you want. You can change the art, you can change the resolution as well. Actually, let's give that a go. Good thing about doing a live session, we could double check that on the screen. So we've already done, I think we already did a high speed, didn't we, on Nathan's eye there. So that was a high speed done on last time. Let's choose that scan. Oh, actually, good question. No, you can't. That's the answer to that one. We can't change from high speed to high res, and it'll be the same the other way. Thanks, Nathan. Sit back for me there. So, okay, that's one of the things we can't do. So, to be honest, like I say, that's probably another reason why a lot of clinics use high speed in their follow-up scans rather than throwing in the high resolution. Okay, so how are we doing for time, Em? Have we got time to do anything else?
No, we're okay. We've got another question. If you could just repeat
Yeah.
it after I've said it. So when do you recommend using the Raster Scan?
Tricky one. The Raster Scan actually goes right back in time, to be honest. I think the Raster Scan, should we come out of the sorry? For thickness maps, yeah, I suppose for thickness maps you could do if you wanted a thickness map right the way across the surface of the retina. Yeah, well, let's open up a Raster Scan to have a look at one of them. What I was going to say as well is the Raster Scan is kind of like an old historical OCT pattern that was always used back in the very early days of OCT. It was an extension of having a kind of single line or a squares. A lot of drug protocols as well actually ask for a 7-line raster. It's just part of the old history of OCT. But as Emily said, absolutely right. You can also get a thickness map from that raster line pattern as well. Okay, what should we do? We got any more time for any more imaging?
Yeah, we've got 5 minutes.
Got 5 minutes.
Can we go?
Should we have a go at doing some multicolour imaging, and then we'll switch over and do some autofluorescence if we can. So again, before I do this, I think one of the things I really wanted to specify is that really for blue autofluorescence imaging, for blue peak imaging, you really should dilate the patient's eye. Nathan has volunteered for us to do it on him this evening. We're going to give it a go, but again, if you really want those crisp autofluorescence images, it's all about the size of the window because the light is so bright when we engage that blue laser. So I'm just having a quick look at Nathan's pupils to see which one's a bit bigger. So again, we're in a fairly bright room, but we'll see how we go. Now, before we do anything here, the really important thing about autofluorescence is actually lining up, because what you don't want to do is dive straight in, hit blue autofluorescence and start taking images, okay? Because the light is going to be incredibly bright on the patient's eye. And by the time you've lined up and start building up your art on the image, the patient might basically just not tolerate it much longer. So if you can give yourself as short a window as you can to expose the eye to the blue light, that's the ideal thing. So what I always say is it's all about, once again, the infrared. So lining up with our fixation target there on the infrared. And again, the same technique I explained right at the beginning of how to get a nice bright infrared image right the way across the board, okay? So I'm lined up and I'm ready to engage my autofluorescence, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to warn Nathan it's going to be a little bit bright in his eye. Oh, by the way, as well, if you are using a Spectralis for the filter wheel, to do autofluorescence, you need to be on the A filter section of the filter wheel. So again, I'm going to enable that blue autofluorescence from the menu now. So here we go. And again, push the gain all the way up, and I'm going to enable the arts. So we're at 100% gain there, and we're building up the image. And we're getting a fairly decent autofluorescence there. But again, what was the key there? Okay, sit back for me, Nathan. I'm going to turn it off now. Stop blinding you. There we go. The key there, and I did it at the last minute actually, is I pushed the gain all the way up. So with autofluorescence as well, it helps if you've got the touchscreen panel too, is that can just give you that, again, that manual control over the image, just allows you to blast up the gain and get the best possible autofluorescence. Now, I don't want to blow my own trumpet, but for an undilated eye, it's a fairly decent blue autofluorescence image. What we could have done as well there is actually maybe defocus it a little bit, but it's fairly decent. What we could also do is actually put some sharpening in on that image as well. And there you can see Nathan's retina in lovely autofluorescence, undilated, okay? So I would say really, dilation does make it easier, but as you can see, it's perfectly possible without. And it's just, I would say dilation on someone who had a really small pupil, maybe like 3 mil or something like that.
Someone's just said here, again, if you can repeat what I said.
Yeah.
What diopter adjustment do you make for EDI and FAF images? So I think you just said it, but just repeat?
Yeah, so for EDI and autofluorescence, you dial in a slight minus, 0.75 minus, generally, but again, it always depends on the patient's eyeball length and the focus of the diopter on the patient, but really it's a bit of a minus that you dial in to get those better images.
And did you put the tracking on for autofluorescence as
I
well?
did. Sorry if I did that a bit quick.
Just repeat what I said.
I'm just thinking about the time, yeah. So Emily just said, did I enable the tracking for my autofluorescence? So what I did is I lined up an infrared, and yes, I did enable the art setting and built up that image to take the autofluorescence photograph. So I think we've just about got enough time to do a multicolor image, if Nathan is up for that. Okay. Now, again, one of the other things to note here, without dilation, remember I've already exposed Nathan's right eye to autofluorescence, which has probably constricted both pupils anyway, so I might as well stay on the same eye, but I'm doing the same thing again. I'm going to line up in infrared, okay? Oh, sorry, and we're going to flick the filter wheel down to R, okay, on the head itself, and that's how I enable multicolor. But can you see, I'm not going to put it on just yet because I just want to line up and get my retina nice and bright. We'll dial down the brightness a little bit there. Okay, now again, that's about Nathan's diopter focus, isn't it, that we've been doing for his imaging already on his eye. So maybe let's dial in a little bit of a minus, down from that 0.75, maybe down to about an 0.25 maybe, and let's see how we go with the autofluorescence. So once again, Nathan just keeps looking at that fixation target. I'm now going to engage multicolor. It's the same process really for doing autofluorescence, and with that enabled, I'm going to push the gain up and we're going to enable tracking. So once again, I'm just building up the images. Now, the difference with multicolor is if we do have any central artifact, I can wiggle the joystick left and right, which can be the same for autofluorescence actually. And if need be, if there is a problematic central artifact, which can be from tear films, I can ask Nathan to look at different spokes of the fixation target. But that's not bad. We're going to save that, and I'll quickly disable multicolor there. So thanks very much, Nathan. Thanks for letting me punish you there. So again, from a patient's perspective, it's not like torture. To be honest, it's not as bright as a mydriatic fundus flash. It's just a fairly bright background image while they're still looking at that fixation target. So I think what helped us there doing that multicolor was that slight minus I dialed in. And as you can see, we've got a wonderfully sharp multicolor image here now. Now, sometimes with multicolor, you do get a kind of artifact in the center, and that can be down to the tear film, can be down to the patient's eye. And as I mentioned, the trick to avoid that is to wiggle the joystick a little bit while you're capturing a multicolor image. Now, again, a common thing we always hear back from customers is I could see the plus sign on the retina. And what's actually happening there is we're actually picking up the reflectance of the internal fixation target. So if you've never yourself sat on a SPECTRALIS, that's actually what the target looks like that Nathan was looking at. And the multicolor can actually pick that up and save it when we're picking up all the different reflectance wavelengths with the SPECTRALIS. And what a multicolor image really is it's a structural fundus image that's made, it's a multispectral image really, that's made with the three different wavelengths from the red, the blue and the green scanning lasers that are inside a SPECTRALIS head, and combined together you get this structural color image. So much more than a standard white light photograph, you can actually understand what's high and low in a multicolor image by the different colors. Now, if I enhance the blue-green, this actually tells you the exact structures on Nathan's retina. As you can see, things that are prouder on the surface are at a shorter light wavelength. So, such as the nerve fiber layer there, the inner limiting layer itself across the surface of the retina, that's in the blues and the greens, the shorter wavelengths, whereas the deeper structures, such as the choroid and the RPE, they're of course deeper down in those different red colors there. So that's again one of the benefits of being able to take multicolor and autofluorescence. Now we're about 5 minutes over. Have we got any more questions then?
That's all the questions.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us. That was our first one, so thank you very much. If you do have any more requests for anything like this again, let me just share my webcam to say goodbye. Yeah, thanks for joining us. If you do have any more questions or requests from what I've shown you this evening, let us know. Email the team at actually through the which email address to use? Academy-UK@heidelberg.com, heidelbergengineering.com. Okay, so yeah, ping us an email and go on the website to look at any of our other recorded webinars. If any of you want to share tonight's session with any of your colleagues, it'll be up on the website in a few 2-3 weeks, and you should be able to get this recording up there. I'm sorry, yeah, next week is next month is the glaucoma session. So once again, thank you all so much for joining us. I hope you found it useful. I hope I answered some questions, and some of you that are new, maybe some of you that have used it for a while have learned something new. And again, thank you, my colleagues Nathan and Emily, for putting on this session with us this evening. Okay, take care everyone.